And welcome back. The bail system creates an unfair advantage and negatively affects individuals who have less money than others. The Bail Project pays for bail for those persons in need at no cost to the individual, but at the same time, they're trying to or I should say they're working to take money out of the justice system. They aim to actually create a fairer system, treating people as innocent until proven otherwise. Joining us now is the Bail Project's Chief Executive Director, David Gaspar.
All right, thank you. Good morning.
Thank you so much, and thanks for taking the time to really talk about this issue here because it is prevalent, and a lot of people have a lot of opinion on it. But certainly, I'd love to get some clarity from you when it comes to the mission. So, talk to us a little bit about the mission.
Yeah, once again, thanks for having me. The Bail Project is a national nonprofit dedicated to securing freedom for people who are jailed before trial, meaning before they've had their day in court, simply because they can't afford bail. Every day, we provide free bail assistance to those in need, ensuring that no one is forced to sit behind bars due to their financial situation. But our work does go far beyond bailouts. We're proving each and every day that justice doesn't have to come with a price tag. What began as our mission to pay bail for those who couldn't afford it became undeniable evidence that cash bail simply isn't about public safety. It's about poverty. It's about adequate access to mental health. And it's about adequate access to substance addiction treatment. We showed time and time again throughout our 30 plus thousand bailouts that when people are given support instead of punishment, they return to court successfully. They stay connected to their families and that they build stronger futures for themselves. Armed with this truth, over the years, we've been turning individual acts of freedom into a movement for systemic change. And today, we're working to eliminate cash bail entirely and create a more just and fair system, one that we believe is possible, where freedom is never determined by a person's wealth.
Yeah. Well, talk to me a little bit about why you feel like cash bail needs to go.
So, cash bail is a substitute for a judge making a decision. What we know, especially from the bail reform that's happened in Illinois, is that when you put a system in place where the judge actually has to look at the facts of the case and make a determination if an individual actually poses a threat to the community or to a specific person, or even presents themselves as a flight risk, then the judge has the ability to keep them in custody. But where those facts do not bore out the truth of the individual posing a threat of risk, then the individual is released. What we have right now, primarily across America, is that instead of looking at those facts, instead of making a determination, bail is set. And the bail is supposed to be this determining factor that if an individual has enough money, then they must present themselves as being safe for the community, which in fact is not true.
And when you look at where we are right now, obviously a lot of Americans are dealing with the whole issue of bail. And I know that there's a problem that you have too, that you feel is bail as though used as a sense of coercion.
Absolutely. Um, I'm somebody who's been system impacted. At 22 years old, I found myself sitting inside of a jail cell facing some serious charges. I had an eighth grade education, not a penny in the bank, not a family member that could have helped me post my bail. As a result, I took a plea bargain for nearly 21 years in prison, only to find out upon my appeal that I should never spent even a quarter of that time in prison. But at that moment, not knowing better, not having the resources, and not having anybody there that could actually walk me through what that process looked like and what my actual rights were, I ended up just giving in. I ended up only seeing one way out, and that was through a plea bargain. And it definitely felt like a very coercive moment in a period of my life.
David, does it feel like for people who've been held on bail, people who are on bail, that there is this presumption of guilt that's already there simply because you have bail on you?
I think as a society, we see it that way. I think when we think of somebody being in jail, we automatically assign a level of guilt to them. And that if the individual were to be able to post their bond and we saw them still showing up for work, still dropping the kids off at school, we wouldn't think otherwise. So I do think that there is a perception that comes along with individuals that sit in jail. But the reality is that overwhelmingly, the individuals in our jail have not been found guilty of any crime as of the moment that they're still sitting in that cell. And on top of that, most people sitting in our jails across America are there on low level, nonviolent offenses. And so I would just beg the question, why are they there in the first place?
And when we talk about bail as a whole overall, I know that the whole racial issue comes up, and it very much needed to be talked about. So let's get into it for a moment. When we talk about bail, from your perspective, discriminatory? Yes, no.
I would say that the evidence bears itself that race does play a factor. We've seen time and time again throughout America that bails for Black and Brown community members are set higher. We also see that bails for Black and Brown individuals are set where, in other cases, they're not set for individual of Caucasian, you know, background. So we do see that there's evidence there. We also see in our work that we are paying higher bonds for individuals that we post for that have Black or Brown or identify as BIPOC. So the evidence is there. I wouldn't have to even venture out to say that it's my opinion. We see it time and time again, and once again, it's not just our work, but it's studies across America that continue to show that as being true.
You mentioned something a couple of seconds ago. I want to go back to that for a minute. You said that in your own personal situation, you recognize that you could have been possibly a quarter of your sentence could have been reduced simply because of the fact of bail and how that plays a part. Take me through a lot of people's perspective from behind bars. Is bail one of those things that says, listen, I got a pressure here, and I'm potentially have the ability to like plead out early or plead wrong simply because of the whole, or plead guilty, if you will, simply because
Yeah,
of bail?
yeah, absolutely. In my time, being in the system, I spent close to a year and a half in the county jail. So I have my personal experience, but I can also tell you countless times that I was sitting there just watching people on the phone only facing very low level charges but accepting pleas because they had to be able to get back to their job before they lost it. They had to be able to get back to their families before they lost custody of their children. They were worried about how they were going to pay their next rent, or how they're going to make their next car payment. And so you have those pressures weighing on you at each and every moment. It's not like life just gets put on pause while you try to sort out and figure out what's going on with your legal process. Each and every day that you're in jail, you are weighing your freedom and ability to go out there and not have your life completely deteriorate before your eyes, or you sit here and you fight for what you believe is just and fair. And the balance just isn't in your favor because each and every day that you fight for fairness, each and every day that you fight for justice, you're also making a sacrifice for not only yourself, but for your family and those that you care about.
Yeah. So let's talk about reform, a better way. A lot of people
Yeah.
say we need better. We need to do better. I know part of the work that you're doing, with your organization is really taking the look at bail and seeing ways that we can make this situation better. So, from your perspective, how do you see that happening?
Absolutely. The starting point for me is what is the process for determining someone's ability to be released? Meaning, what is the assessment process in which a judge is looking at evidence and making a determination on record as to saying why this person belongs in custody because they pose a direct threat or they pose a risk to the community or a flight risk? That is the starting point. Once we get that process implemented, then we can say that cash no longer has a place here. Because if the person is deemed eligible for release, they should be released without that financial burden. If a person is deemed to be a threat to our communities, then that person should be held, once again, without bail. But there's a bigger system that is at play here. And it is one where we have to acknowledge what are some of the conditions that are bringing people into contact with law enforcement in the first place. So when we start to say fairness and we start to say what does the process need to look like, we can say for a very healthy person to be able to be assessed makes sense. Here's the process. But what happens when you have somebody with mental health in front of you, and now they've had a mental health moment of crisis, and that brought them into engagement with law enforcement? But instead of taking them and getting the medical treatment, we're taking them to a jail we're confining them without medication, we're only making their situation worse. So we also have to look at what are some of the alternatives that need to be implemented in order to make sure that we have a healthy process for how we meet our community where they are needed to be met at. So there is the safety piece, 100%, but that is about looking at facts, making determinations on record, and understanding why we're making decisions so that we can better improve upon how we make those decisions going forward. But we also have to address the poverty and the mental health and the substance addiction treatment that is needed as well, because these are individuals that need medical attention or they need financial assistance in ways that the jail system and the judicial system just cannot meet.
Can you give me a little insight here when we talk about pretrial? Because a lot of questions are concerned about pretrial, how that's handled, and how that could actually be an asset and also a possibility in this bail reform discussion.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, the reminder that I always like to give people is that pretrial just means that you have not yet had your day in court. It means you have not yet been found guilty of anything, and you have not yet been sentenced to any conditions of confinement or otherwise. And so when we talk about pretrial, we're talking about really what is fairness. And we know that, the founding fathers of America said that no one's going to have their liberty taken from them without just cause and process. And so we're really talking about the process for what does it look like for an individual to maintain the pretrial conditions of release, that liberty that has been guaranteed to each and every one of us as Americans. And so that process of pretrial should be one about identifying what we can be doing to better support our community. What can we be doing to better understand the conditions that bring people into uh, contact with law enforcement? And how can we start to actually look at our communities and say, you know what, we have perfect blueprints where things are working really, really well. And how do we invest in those resources in the areas that it's needed most?
When we look at this right now, we see a lot of people who have really been affected, adversely affected by this. But from your perspective, I want to talk about the work that the Bail Project is doing because you guys have actually been able to transform lives and really transform the way a person has to deal with the system. So take us inside of some of the positive things that you've been able to accomplish.
Yeah, absolutely. It's one of the most self-rewarding or rewarding aspects of the work is when you actually get to intervene in somebody's life in a way that brings them back into the household as a parent, back in the household as a contributor, back in the household as individuals who are contributing to their communities. I've had, the honor and privilege of being able to be a bail client advocate in my early days with the Bail Project prior to advancing in my role. And in those moments, you actually get to hear the human stories. I once bailed out an individual who, his wife and him had separated. He ended up losing a lot of you know, the access to the things that they had acquired together. Really sent him spiraling, and he turned to drugs to cope with the pain. And at the moment that I intervened, I was able to get him out. I remember his words saying, I actually thought nobody would ever care about me again. I thought nobody would, care enough about who I am as an individual. And not only was I able to be able to support him, but I was able to connect him to resources that helped him with his housing, that helped him with employment, that helped him get clothes back on his back. And to be part of those stories is really impactful. But I also, once again, just referring back to my story, I like to tell people that I'm proof. I'm proof that our jails and prisons are currently denying people of their human potential. I am somebody that not only was unfairly sentenced incorrectly, but since I've came home in less than 2 decades, I've been able to become the father that I always wanted to be to my children, to be the husband to my wife that I always wanted to be a contributing community member and giving back. I've also been able to make a nice healthy career for myself and doing the work that brings me satisfaction. So I'm just one story of countless, and when I say countless, there's millions of us. One out of every three people either are or know somebody who's been incarcerated. And there's too much success in this world to say that the only ones who are succeeding are those who haven't been impacted by the judicial system. That would be a false statement.
So where do you take the bail project from here?
You know, the Bail Project right now is really about how are we going to instill a better understanding of what is possible. And so some of the things that I've already shared is what is the judicial process for assessing risk, assessing threat or safety, when it comes to the community? How do we get more judges to buy in to the fact that this is something that is well within their ability? How do we get more states? How do we get more local jurisdictions to understand that by stepping in and saying, if we truly care about safety, then let's do what matters when it comes to safety. We continue to want to have moments where fingers are pointed and blame is assigned. But if we really want to bring a difference to the world, we have to start looking at the root causes. We have to start understanding what it takes for us to actually make right decisions that bring about health to our communities. And the Bail Project is all about making that happen, because with each and every bailout that we do, we're collecting the data, we're collecting the stories, we're having a better understanding of what's bringing people into contact with law enforcement, and more important, what is helping people get on that trajectory and that path for them to have successful movement forward post-release.
Yeah. And for people who want to get in touch, what do they do?
You can reach out to us through our website, bailproject.org. It is the easiest way to get a hold of us. If you have needs, we have a need help tab on there, but we also have all of our work represented on there, client stories and all. And I encourage everyone to visit it just to at least familiarize themselves with it.
Well, certainly I want to take the time to say thank you, David, for taking the time to be with us. David Gaspar, who is the Chief Executive Officer of the Bail Project, talking about bail reform and the success of his organization. Thanks for taking the time. Congratulations on the journey and continue the great work.
Thank you so much. Appreciate the opportunity.
All right, brother. All right, well, listen, we'll take a quick break. We'll be back with more coming up right after this.